Okay, finally, in our marathon revision video series, we get to how to write our thesis statement and introduction. And maybe you wished you'd had this before you wrote your first draft. But what I really like about this process is that it shows you might not know what your thesis statement is until you've finished writing and thinking about it. So it shows you that you do not have to start with your introduction and you do not have to start with your thesis statement. Later on, you might need to start with a working thesis. That's what we call it, an idea that you have. But you always have to be flexible and willing to kind of change it and revise as you go. So our objective for this video is to really understand how to write a thesis statement that accurately captures the major ideas of your essay, or to start understanding that that's what a thesis statement does. And then I also want you to understand what I mean by the zoom in method for writing an introduction. So this should help you with your revision. Okay, so I want to go back to this kind of thing that we're talking about. So a lot of your first draft felt a little bit like a journal entry or personal writing. And so let's contrast that with what it means to write for an audience, because you're writing for an audience of your peers. So when you're writing a journal entry, you can make a million different points and never put them together, and that's fine. It's not about drawing them together. You can have paragraphs that start in one place and end in a completely different place, or that start without telling the audience or saying what you actually mean and getting to the point at the very end. You can catalog. You can just say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. You don't have to come up with a pattern. You don't actually need concrete examples. And you don't need an introduction because it's just for you or for no one really. But when we're writing for audiences, we actually have to basically do all of this stuff. You need to have some kind of way to show them why you're putting two ideas together. All right, there should be some cohesion. So a thesis statement is the kind of statement that does the work of gluing all the different ideas in your essay together. And I wanted to show you this word pithy. Pithy is a great word. It means like the perfect little word or the perfect little idea that pulls together all these things. It's like very clever and to the point. So a thesis statement is clever and to the point. It's a sentence that logically connects all of the pieces, all the ideas in your piece. The other thing you need is that your paragraphs actually need to know what they're doing and know where they're going. And so they also have to announce to the reader with a topic sentence or a headline where they're going. And it needs to preview what's actually going to be proven or what you're actually going to illustrate by the end of the paragraph. You also need to give us some concrete examples, and that's the prove it or the show it part. So you say, hey, here's what I think about this. And then they're like, oh, tell me more. You give them some examples, you give them some details, and then you say, that's why I think that, and they can buy it. Also, you're going to need to have an introduction, and it's going to need to invite them kind of, instead of just like throwing them into the deep end, you need to have them wade through the water to get to the point where they're ready to swim in the pool that you've created. Wow, we've got a million different metaphors. You can tell that I really like pools and I like houses. What can I say? I'm almost 40 years old. Okay, so here's what you want to do. Working on a thesis statement. This essay is kind of weird because I said, do two things. Tell me what writing means to you and tell me how you're going to use Gen AI. This is something that you need to connect together in one sentence. So what is it? What is the relationship between how you use writing and what writing means to you and how you believe you're going to actually use generative AI in your life? So what you're looking for is some connection between those two things. Where do those two things intersect? Your values, what you like, what you do, and how you're going to use this tool. That, however you can articulate that intersection, that is going to be the thesis statement. So you might want to pause this video and spend a little time writing, okay, how does my relationship to writing intersect with my relationship to Gen AI? Or what is the connection between my attitude to Gen AI and how I value and use writing? And that attitude, that connection, that intersection should come across in the essay that you're writing. That can be your thesis statement. So feel free to pause the video, write a little bit, and see if you can come up with a good sentence that expresses that relationship based on what you've written in your first draft. Okay, so let's look at some examples of what that might be. So someone who doesn't want to use generative AI to write might say, because I value creativity and learning, and because AI eliminates that from writing, I am not going to use generative AI to write. Right, so this kind of brings together all of those things, and that would be a great thesis statement. And then the rest of the essay would talk about the way you value creativity and learning, and the way you use writing to be creative and you use writing to learn. And then you can talk about the problems with that and how AI jeopardizes that. Or if you're somebody who really, really is excited, you're a technology person, you're a futurist, and you love experimenting with your own creativity, connecting that to technology. Maybe you say, given what you've written, you say, my enthusiasm about technology really hooks up with the way that I use writing as kind of like a creative builder or an exploration tool. And therefore, I think I'm going to use generative AI. So what you actually say here doesn't matter to me. It's that you need to have a thesis statement that accurately puts these two things together so that the reader knows what they're about to read and why they're reading about your values or how you use writing, and why they're reading about what you think about generative AI. So in order, that thesis statement is going to come at the end of your introduction. So how do we actually write this introduction? All right, well, we said that readers like to know where they're going, but they also need to have a reason to care. So you want to relate your to your audience. If you know who your audience is, fellow UAB students, then you want to start an essay by talking about something that matters to them. So you want to think, okay, what about generative AI in writing would relate to my audience? You also want to continue doing this thing we've been talking about, which is giving them something concrete to actually see, to visualize, so that they're not bored to death. So it's not just concepts that are abstract. And then you want to end that with your thesis statement. So you want to consider your thesis statement. You want to consider your audience. What is something that relates to them, how to revise or how to actually write an intro? And what's an illustration that can make them care? And then you want to compose that introduction. So I'm going to give you an example because this is a little bit more complex. And then I'm going to give you a moment to pause and say, how can I do that for my own essay? So I like to use what's called the zoom in strategy. And the way it works is this. You say, if I have a purpose, so the purpose of an introduction, rather, is to set the stage for the audience so they have a little bit of context for what you're going to discuss. And this means that you don't want to start with something really abstract from far away. You want to start with the actual content of what you're going to be talking about in this essay. So jump right into your topic. And that's the zoom in part. You're not trying to start since the beginning of time, all people have liked writing. You're talking about specifically you, specifically in this time, or you're talking about specifically generative AI, specifically in your life, and then you want to reveal your takeaway. So this is a zoom in method. You want to make sure that you're relating to that audience. You want to get into their head. Before you start writing, you actually want to think, what is the relationship that I can make between the audience and this issue? I don't want you to, though, think, oh, I have to pull out all the stops and have to make them. No, it's just a simple relationship. What is something that they can say, yeah, I've thought about that too, or that affects my life too. That's all you're looking for. You don't want to start an introduction talking about stuff that you don't know about. So let's read my essay introduction. If I were writing an essay about writing and generative AI, let's take a look at this. The deep dread about our new ChatGPT world finally hit me, not when I was lying awake in the pitch blank night or when in the classroom with students, but when I was surrounded by 20 adorable, well-loved dogs, joyfully bounding, playing, peeing, stretching, and wrestling with one another. Okay, so I'll say, I started off jumping right into the topic of ChatGPT and of generative AI, and I gave you a concrete thing to kind of look at. right? You can imagine all these dogs doing these things and people like dogs. So that's sort of a relatable thing already. Like nobody doesn't like, there are people who don't like dogs, but at least they can envision it, right? They've seen this. It's sort of evocative. It was early 2022 and I was sitting with a friend at a dog park as our animals galloped carefree in the vicinity. Meanwhile, as he told me about how awesome it was that ChatGPT could now write scripts for the videos he made for his business, I felt anything but the joy of the dogs around me. To hear it from him, writing could now be done at the click of a button. But not only was writing my profession, what would happen if no one needed me anymore? How would I make money? I have no skills. But writing was and is for me possibly the most valuable activity I ever engage in. As I've learned more about generative AI over the last 3 years, I have not converted from dread to dog-like joy, but I have seen how generative AI can play an interesting role as a writing companion. As someone for whom writing is not just a way to earn a living, but a way to make life worth living, I will use generative AI to enhance and extend my own thinking and to help students learn to think harder about the world around them. Okay, so my thesis is this: as someone for whom writing is not just a way to earn a living, but a way to make life worth living. So that's my relationship to writing. And then it tells me, and then it goes on and says, what is the connection between that and how I'm going to use generative AI? So hopefully you get a sense of how I zoomed in. I said, guess what? We're zooming right into the issue of me and ChatGPT and writing and what it means. And I'm giving you an illustration of what that is all about. So I would like you to end on this. After you've kind of come up with your connection, come up with your thesis statement, how can you relate to the audience? And what is something that they might also feel about ChatGPT or about writing? And then what is some kind of concrete illustration, descriptive moment in your life that you can use to help them think through that? So that is all I have for you on your introduction and your thesis statement today.